Welcome to the Future Philosophy Podcast. I'm Emanuele. So, today, for the second episode of this podcast, I'm going to talk about Alexander the Great, arguably one of the greatest generals of all time / emperors of all time. A great personality, too, although he was probably a little bit of an impulsive guy. Definitely one of the best generals of all time. He was never beaten in battle outside of one time in modern day Turkey, in Anatolia at the time. Although it was not a real defeat, because the next day he took the city. I'm talking about the city of Sardi in Anatolia. But anyway, outside of that, we need to think, talking about Alexander the Great, we need to think that this man alone was able to unite the entire known world at the time. It's like it would be like modern day US capable of take everything from east to west, the entire world, conquering everything from east to west, the entire world, comprehensive of China, of Russia, and so on, leaving really few other places free or without domination. Of course, there was still Italy. The Greeks knew about Italy, knew about Rome already, knew about Libya, and all places that Alexander did not conquer. But there is a reason behind it. It is because he died really, really young. And in such a short period of time, he was able to achieve what nobody had achieved. So it is possible to it's not wrong to say that if he had a longer life, he probably had even conquered Italy or Illyria and other places. Although Illyria was under his rule, it was a vassal state. But in any case, properly conquer Illyria and so on, or Sparta for that reason. Uh, Alexander was born in Macedonia, modern day South Macedonia, which is ridiculous, in Greece. And he was born in Pella in 356 BC. He succeeded his father Philip II to the throne at the age of 20, so very, very young. He spent most of his ruling years in a military campaign all through Africa and Northeast Africa and Asia. In Africa, in Egypt, and in Asia, mostly against the Persian Empire. Actually, only against the Persian Empire, if we don't count that he also had a little campaign who was not that incisive in India, in northeast India, northwest India. And he was undefeated in battle, as I said, and is widely considered one of the history's most successful military commanders. During his, he was the son of a king, and this king was Philip II, who gave him the throne at the age of 20 because he died through the hands of one of his guard, if I remember correctly. I think it was he was called, yeah, he was a bodyguard, and his name was Pausanias of Oressis. And once he was dead, Alexander heredited a good military in all of aspects of battle. So Philip II already was a battle-hardened veteran, and the army that he left to Alexander was basically an experienced army and a well-oiled machine that could already take over Persia. It was the dream of Philip, actually. So from his father to conquer Persia, he had that in mind before he got killed. It is very, very strange that the father and son died relatively young, but still accomplished what many thought it was impossible, and was almost impossible to do at the time of the rule of Athens, of Sparta. And he, at the age of 30, his empire stretched, at the age of 30 for Alexander, his empire stretched from Greece to northwest India. Although in India, he lost that satrapies, as it was called, practically when he retired his army from that region. So already after he conquered the 10 to 12 years time, it was already gone, the easternmost satrapy. And yeah, about his life, when he was young, he was tutored by Aristotle until he was 16. And after Philip's assassination in 336 BC, he succeeded his father to the throne, inherited a strong kingdom and an experienced army. Alexander was awarded the generalship of Greece and used this authority to launch, as I said, his father's Pan-Hellenic project to lead the Greek in the conquest of Persia. In 334 BC, he invaded the Achaemenid Empire. Achaemenid was the name of the Persian Empire through the Achaemenid rule, who was a dynasty, and began a series of campaigns that lasted nearly 10 years. Following the conquest of the nearby Anatolia, Alexander broke the power of Persia in a series of decisive battles, most notably the Battle of Issus and Gaugamela. So Issus was a river in modern-day Turkey, in Anatolia at the time, and Alexander trapped the Persian army and defeated Darius. Many people say that Gaugamela was his most important victory, but is actually Issus the most important victory of Alexander against Darius III, the ruler of the Achaemenid Empire at the time. Why is that? Because in Issus, Alexander defeated an army that was prepared to fight, meaning that it was the best Persian army that he could go against. In Gaugamela, the Persian army was already defeated at Issus and in other parts in southern Turkey and modern-day Lebanon, and he also already lost Egypt. They were the ruler of Egypt at the time, and Alexander was met by the Egyptian as a liberator from the Persian rule. He was nominated even pharaoh in Egypt. At that point, when he met at Gaugamela, the Persian Empire, at Gaugamela, Darius had just basically called everyone that was lasted in the empire to fight Alexander. It is more or less what happened with the Romans in Cannae against Hannibal. They called all the people that they could call, and thinking that they could crush a well-established army and an experienced army who already went against the Persians in Issus, and they thought that only the sheer number would be enough to beat the Macedonian army. Of course, that never happens in a battle, especially in ancient times. If you have a experienced army, it is impossible, nearly impossible, for the if they are not really overwhelming number, it is nearly impossible for unexperienced troops to beat well-trained and experienced, already battle-hardened veterans troop. Think about this: in a fight, in a just a hand-on-hand fight, on a one-on-one fight, me, even if I train 2 days, 3 days before a fight against Mike Tyson, I would never be able to kill him in an hand-on-hand combat, or knock him out, or winning in boxing against him. This is the principle of battle, of any battle. If you are against an experienced army, they already felt what it is to be in a fight, in a combat setting. The Persian, they did not had, even at the beginning in Issus, and against the early stage of this campaign of Alexander the Great, even though they had some troops that were experienced or trained for battle, they were just crushing people for centuries with their sheer number, and against people who were not trained. We had that already 300 years before what happened with Alexander, when they met the Greeks at Thermopylae and in Plataea. They were fighting mostly because they were a lot of people, so they were throwing all nations of the Persian Empire against the enemy. But even in that case, they did not address the fact that their army was not prepared to fight experienced and well-trained and well-equipped fighters like the Greek were. So even a big number can be defeated by experienced and battle-hard veteran. The same thing happened in Gaugamela, and it happened in a destructive fashion. Although, as I said, in Issus, at least the Persian army was not that bad, so to say. For modern historians, the Battle of Gaugamela was also the biggest battle in which Alexander found itself. And what is really compelling about Alexander, that most of the time Alexander was fighting, being in a deficit of number of infantrymen, and sometimes even cavalry. Was always fighting 2-1, 3-1, sometimes 4-1. In Gaugamela, the modern estimate is that the Persian Empire had between 90,000 and 120,000 soldiers. Ancient sources says even 1 million, although that is nearly impossible, for various reasons. One of them being that at that time they could not move an army such large without having a massive camp that they could not afford. And so 90,000 to 120,000 modern estimate for the Persian, and only 47,000 in the hands of Alexander the Great. So we're talking about 3 times the size of Alexander's army. It's and Alexander did not only emerged victorious due to his army's superior tactics and his deft employment of light infantry. It was a decisive victory of the the Hellenic League, and led to the fall of the Achaemenid Empire. So it was a turning point in history. That is why Gaugamela is known. And by doing that, he overthrew the Persian king, Darius III, and conquered the Achaemenid Empire in its entirety. At that point, his empire was stretching from the Adriatic Sea and up to Babylon, where he entered in splendid fashion. He put Babylon at, in a way, the capital of his empire, and he ruled from there up until he died. Many people say that he died because of someone poisoning him, but what we know is that Alexander was a heavy drinker, and that possibly led to his kidney to fail. Also, he was a very difficult personality to deal with, and he had fight with Cletus, who killed in a collutation deep into the Persian Empire. And Alexander was also dreamer, so to speak. He liked to dream of a world that is united under his rule, and that led him to reach even India and fight Porus Kingdom near the Ganga River. So fighting the Nanda Empire, who was an empire in the north west of India, and he tried to subjugate the entire India subcontinent. What blocked him to do that was not his dream or his physique, who, by the way, was a lot proved by years and years of battle, but the people that were with him, his experienced soldier, who were already 10 to 12 years outside of Macedonia, wanted to enjoy life at that point after such a long campaign, decided to turn the back to him, and he was forced to go back. But it's also telling about the mind of Alexander the Great is that during his retreat, he let his army pass through the desert and did not choose the right way to go back. He chose the difficult way, and probably he did that because he wanted to make a point to their that retreat led them to a lot of casualties, and probably he did that just because his military commanders did not follow him deep down in India and continue to fight with him. So he probably was what would we call an impetus guy, so a guy that for his dream he is willing to sacrifice the entire army for his dream, which is in a way kind of good for the history of Alexander as it is known, but probably it would not be fun to fight with him, with a guy who is willing to sacrifice you for his dream. And the life of Alexander the Great cannot be compressed in just half an hour on an hour or even a day of talking, but I think that for me, what is really important about Alexander the Great, what is the lesson of Alexander the Great, is that everything can be achieved in life if you are following your dreams. I know this may sound cheesy, but is what he wanted to do, what his father wanted to do, was becoming the kings of kings, and he wanted to be the best, the most well-known person in the world ever in history, and to pass through history as one of the best commanders of all time. And probably he achieved that by putting himself in the first spot. There is not another guy that comes into my mind that can overthrow Alexander the Great as the best military commander. He's probably the point, the very point of the spear, the very top of the pyramid of the military commander, of the conquerors in general. I mean, other two people that can, of course, Sargon of Akkad was the guy who invented, so to speak, this way of conceiving the world. He was the first, at least known, reported general, commander, and you know, an over-the-top personality. But putting him before Alexander the Great is not possible, in my view, because Alexander conquered everything that was possible at the time, and he did it in such a short period of time. And probably Julius Caesar can be seen as the second, and from after them there is really no one. Well, no, actually there is one, Genghis Khan, that can probably be put in the same categories of those three. The other commanders usually, I mean, another very famous commander is Napoleon, but Napoleon at the end lost. Alexander never lost. So did Julius Caesar. He was those people, and so did Genghis Khan, by the way. But those people were defeated just by death, and for me that is important. I to conclude, as I said, it's impossible to do a short podcast, a half an hour podcast on Alexander the Great. His story is very well documented. There are pages and books and even films about it. But as I said, what is really important of him is understanding his personality. So don't read, I mean, of course you can read thousands of books about him, but don't read him just as a military commander, as a, you know, conqueror and so on. Read him as a person, who he was, and how you in your little world can achieve by using his type of mentality, his way of thinking, his dream way of thinking. And I think we can learn a lot of things from those previous personalities, from those ancient personalities, and we can learn also how to engage in life. You know, never retreat, pushing forward even if it's difficult, and so on. And do never become the guy that at the end of the campaign wants to go home. Just try to follow, you know, Alexander even deeper in India, in your lives, India. And yeah, that's all I have for today. Unfortunately, it's a very short podcast for today. Have things to do. I'm also human. But what I can say to you is you can watch, you can actually read the Wikipedia page about Alexander the Great. That is, I know that Wikipedia has this stigma that is that you know that it's not very good. It's not a very academically good tool, but actually it is, in my view, a very good starting point to understand, to give an overview of who Alexander was and so on, or in general about history. And you can also go there and check other things about his father, what was the Hellenic League, how was the Battle of Issus of Gaugamela. So you can check those things in Wikipedia and going deep down and bouncing off from article to article. So I think it's a very good starting point to learn about him. But learn about him. It's a very important personality. It is a one-of-a-kind man that it should have been very beautiful to meet. Probably he was a dick. I mean, no wonder. I would know. I would not be surprised. But at least to meet the guy that has conquered everything, the king of all kings. The undefeated champ, so to speak. That would be, and you can meet him in the text, and especially the old historian text. And as I said, to start, you can start reading his Wikipedia page because it's very well written and it's very full of information, very complete, so to speak. So that's it for today for me. I'm going to come back for a third episode. I still don't know. I'm starting this journey into podcast, so I still don't know how to do it, and maybe you can hear that in my voice. Sometimes I'm silent, so please be patient about it. But in any case, thank you for listening, and yeah, goodbye. Have a nice day or evening or whatever.